Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session on expanding the youth serving system during COVID-19. We're super excited that you're joining us today, and we have an awesome panel of folks to share their expertise, and we're hoping to learn from you all as well. So I'm going to start with some introduction. So my name is Jessica Sones. I'm an associate with Diana T. Myers and Associates. We're a homelessness and housing consulting group based in Eastern PA. My background prior to coming to DMA was working with youth experiencing homelessness in the city of Philadelphia, both with city government and with provider agencies. So this is a topic that is very important and dear to me. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves with their name, pronoun, if you'd like to share your pronoun, what role you play in your system, and also if you were a superhero, what superhero would you be, or if that's not your cup of tea, what superpower would you have? And my pronouns are she and her. If I could have any superpower, it would be to speak all the languages and understand all of the languages. So I'm going to start with Devin. Devin, actually, I'm going to share my screen so everyone can see your names and what you do. So Devin, can you start us off and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Devin Getz. I work at Oberly. I oversee our housing programs at Oberly. And if I could have a superpower, I think it would be to be invisible.
Nice. I like that one. And Leonardo?
Hello, everyone. My name is Leonardo Johnson. I'm the Youth Engagement Coordinator. I am at the WASP unit. And if I could have a superpower, it would be the ability to read people's hearts, not their minds, but their hearts.
I love that. I've never heard that before, but that is great. And let's go to Laura.
Hi, everyone. My name's Laura Solly. I'm also with the Allegheny County Department of Human Services, and I oversee our youth homelessness demonstration program. And I would say that if I could have any superpower, I would love to be able to swim underwater without having to hold my breath. I'm not sure if that's a superpower or not, but that'd be cool to have.
Sure, it sounds like a superpower to me. And lastly, we have Leslie.
Hi, my name is Leslie Zacharias. I'm a Youth Action Board Chair. If I could have any superpower, I'd probably want super strength.
Nice. Thank you all for that. I love hearing different things about people, getting to know you a little bit more. So we are going to have hopefully a very interactive discussion today. We're going to start with a brief overview about the topic that we're discussing, overview of the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program in Allegheny County, and then we're going to have a roundtable discussion where we're going to hear from all of these folks about their experiences and expertise working in the field and working with youth experiencing homelessness. So we would love to hear from you all. As we're going through this presentation, we will have time for Q&A at the end, but if you'd like to let us know what questions you have as we go, some of the things we'd like to hear from you is what questions do you have about effectively serving youth experiencing homelessness, whether it's in COVID-19 specifically or more generally, and also what strategies have been effective in your community. We would really love to hear from you all about that. So just a brief framing of what we're going to be talking about today. So communities across Pennsylvania and across the country are working to develop strategies to address youth homelessness. And as most of you know, this can be really challenging. Resources that are designed specifically for youth experiencing homelessness and housing instability can be few and far between, especially depending on where you are. And sometimes the resources that are for folks experiencing homelessness may not be designed with the unique needs of youth in mind. And oftentimes youth homelessness is different than adult homelessness and may look different. Youth often may rely on friend or family networks, couch surfing, and may not necessarily access emergency shelters or be unsheltered in the kind of traditional view of what homelessness looks like. And on top of that, we're adding these complicating factors of the pandemic. So youth experiencing homelessness and housing instability may not be prioritized in communities' COVID-19 response, as youth may not necessarily fall into that category of high risk. but the economic and psychological impact of the pandemic on young people is significant. We know there's housing challenges, employment challenges, education, health, mental health, and all of these have been exacerbated during the pandemic. So communities need to adapt. They need to adapt their response to youth homelessness, make sure youth have the resources they need, both for now during the pandemic, but also sustained long term. So excited to turn it over to Laura, who's going to tell us a little bit about the youth homelessness demonstration program in Allegheny County.
Great, thanks so much, Jessica. If folks are not familiar with the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, just to give kind of a high-level overview, it is a HUD program that's been around for about 3 or 4 years. It started out with a few awards to a couple of different cities across the country, and now it's expanded a bit further. So Allegheny County Department of Human Services applied for our Continuum of Care in 2019 and received the award and designation as a YHDP site. And what that really means is that we have the wonderful opportunity to receive some additional funds to launch new programming, try out new approaches that look and feel a little bit different from sort of business as usual in homeless services, really try to maximize our existing resources, but also add to filling gaps. And the project, the funding is for a 2-year period, and it sort of allows communities to ramp up and scale their projects with the idea that those projects then become a sustaining part of our continuum of care. So it's an incredibly exciting opportunity. And I think it's important to share some of the core components of YHDP, because in addition to funding, it's also, it's really sort of a philosophy or a mindset as we approach system change. So one of the core things from the very beginning is youth leadership. And you'll be meeting the chair of our Youth Action Board, Leslie, in a little bit and getting to hear from her, as well as Leonardo, who oversees the activities of our Youth Action Board for the entire county. They really took on a leadership role with YHDP from the very beginning and helped apply for the funding, helped work on our community plans, and are now in the stage of helping to oversee and implement new projects. There's also a really strong focus on equity and inclusion. So we have been doing a lot of detailed analysis to identify any disparities that different groups are facing when it comes to accessing homeless services, to achieving positive outcomes from programs, and then building strategies, again, in partnership with our youth leaders and other community stakeholders to make sure that nobody is being left behind and that services are being delivered in ways that are really thoughtful about equity and inclusion. And then the other thing I want to highlight here is the coordinated community plan. So we received a 2-year grant, as I mentioned, but before we could actually spend any of that funding or allocate it for specific projects, we really needed to work on a comprehensive plan, working with many different stakeholders, providers, folks from the criminal justice system, from the school system, and many other systems that engage with young adults who are unstably housed, as well as youth themselves who have lived experience. And we spent about 6 months just really unpacking, like, what is working in our system, what is not, what are we missing? And we use that information to really plan our projects and figure out how we are going to make a difference. So we can move on to the next slide. Great, thank you. So it all really came down to a community needs assessment that drove the decision making. So this is just to kind of show the different core areas of focus for YHDP. So we're definitely looking closely at housing, but not just housing. And Jessica touched on sort of some of the other domains that are important to consider when we're thinking about transition age youth and young adults experiencing homelessness. So in addition to housing, we're also thinking about strategies for enhancing access to education, enhancing access to employment that's going to result in livable wages to be able to afford housing long term. And then, of course, social emotional wellness. And then in the middle are sort of the core groups. We, when we were working on our plan, we did a lot of data analysis and focus groups to really understand how does homelessness look for a young person who's parenting. what does homelessness mean for somebody who identifies as LGBTQ? Do we have agencies and partners in the community that are providing safe and appropriate spaces and care for anyone who might need to receive support with a homelessness crisis? And we can go on to the last slide. Thank you. This is just sort of an at a glance view of our youth homelessness response system. And what we ended up doing is taking a lot of the feedback and ideas from the different stakeholders and thinking about, okay, what's missing in our system, what's working well but needs to grow, and what do we want to do that's innovative. So this is a little complicated looking, but any of the items that are in yellow are items that we either added to our system or are significantly expanding with the funding that we received from YHDP. And so you'll hear from Devin, who actually is running 2 projects that received YHDP funding. One is a prevention and diversion project that is really targeted to the needs of 18 to 24-year-olds and is meant to provide sort of a safety net for youth who we haven't always been able to serve in the way that we would want to, and especially young adults who are doubled up in couch surfing. We are also in the process of launching a host home program that is meant to provide community-based alternatives to shelter for young adults who would prefer to be living with a family in a private setting. We're also really scaling up our rapid rehousing. We know that that's been a really effective strategy, but we have not had the resources to meet the needs of all young adults who would benefit from rapid rehousing. And we're kind of putting a different twist on that with emphasizing shared housing. So that was something that came across in a lot of our planning work, that was something of interest. And then the final new project that we're doing is we're calling it Youth Navigation, and it's basically standalone case management, coaching, and supportive services for young adults across our entire continuum. And it's flexible and able to provide a variety of different supports as young people sort of navigate towards safe and stable housing. And that's just sort of an at a glance. I'll turn it back over to Jessica at this point, but we can definitely talk more about any of those program models if folks have questions.
I'm definitely excited to dive into more of that in our panel discussion. So we're going to move to our panel discussion, and what I'm going to do is kind of throw out a question that maybe I'll direct to someone specifically, but anyone can feel free to respond to any of the questions, because we really want to hear from all of you. So the first question, I'm going to pitch it to Leslie, but anyone else can also add on as well. So Leslie, can you talk a little bit about the COVID-19 impact? How has COVID-19 impacted the needs of youth and young adults experiencing homelessness and housing instability in your community? What are you seeing?
My experience was in an adult shelter during COVID-19. The rules were a little bit more strict, and because of COVID-19, so we had to get approval to leave the site 2 days in advance, and it kind of made it harder to look for housing sometimes. But that's my overall experience with it.
Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else has anyone else seen any impacts on youth and young adults experiencing homelessness during the pandemic?
We did. So it affected the shelter space. It would affect individuals because, like Leslie said, you had to apply to leave the shelter with some advance notice. It affected how many people were allowed in the shelter at a certain point. So that dropped dramatically. So then you had more individuals that didn't have access to shelter. Also, because people are so close in the shelter, it really restricted their availability to be able to go and do things, look for housing, go to look for employment, and those sorts of things. It also affected income. So a lot of individuals that we work in industries such as restaurant industries or bars, and with those industries consistently closing and you never really knew what it was that was going on, it really affected their ability to make some income. It also affected our ability to get individuals into any kind of subsidized housing unit because we didn't have easy access to get any missing vital documentation. So they couldn't just walk in and get their social security card. They had to mail a copy of their photo ID. They had to mail their actual physical photo ID in. Well, that took that photo ID out of their hands. So that prohibited them from being able to apply for a job until the social security card came back. All of these different things just all kinds of tied together. So while things are starting to reopen, they're opening slowly, and we still are seeing some of those barriers.
Thank you for that, Devin. I think you really highlighted how all of these factors are really compounding one another as well. So I definitely want to spend some time talking about the Youth Action Board. Laura mentioned that it's a huge part of the YHDP implementation. So I want to first talk about kind of what it is, how it's structured, what the membership is. Leonardo, could you kind of give us a rundown of the Youth Action Board, and then I'll have maybe Leslie add anything as well.
Yes, I can. So our Youth Advisory Board is called CITY, and it stands for System Improvement Through Youth. And pretty much the main goal is to use the experiences that the youth on our or the members on our board have went through to help better the system, the programs, the projects, or anything that may be coming into tuition for youth who are currently in the system. So we invite different providers, organizations, anyone who's doing any work within this field to come to the board and present whatever that they're going to be dishing out to the young people. And then the board is pretty straightforward. Definitely Leslie will tell you exactly how she feels about whatever project, whatever language that is being used. And we also make it a notice that if you are going to come to the board, that you come back and let us know how you use that information, so they can see the impact that they are having within the system. As far as like those who are able to become members, they as long as they have some type of system experience, they are able to join. They don't have to just be like children, youth, and family, or juvenile probation. It can be in any kind of system, and we have even the homeless system as well. You can join our board. And they just have three main goals that they want to do as members on the board. They want to be learners, community leaders, and advocates. And everything we do come from those three foundation topics that we have built our board on. So we are a youth-driven board. We try not to do anything without their approval or their input, and we just make sure we put that youth voice out there, and we prioritize that. All members are paid $10 an hour for their time, so we can show them that we do respect and appreciate and value everything that they bring to our board.
Awesome.
Do you want to know like when we meet, or is that going too far?
Sure. How often you meet?
Right. Well, we meet every Tuesday for about an hour and a half. But if there is another event that might require more of our time, then we will stay longer for that. And they're still paid $10 an hour regardless of how much time it is that day. So yeah, and we're all on Zoom, so it's all virtual.
Awesome. Leslie, do you want to add anything about the YAB, and also kind of maybe talk about what the YAB's role has been with implementing YHDP?
Sure. Some of the stuff that we did to implement YHDP, worked on the grant proposal for HUD YHDP funding. After Allegheny County got the award, we worked on a coordinated community plan to prevent and end homelessness. This included participating in different work groups. So we had a lot of different work groups, such as like education and employment and housing work groups with the community. We helped design programs to be funded with the YHDP grant, and we had at least one youth voice representative from city at the RFP process to help select agencies to lead programs. And that's some of the stuff we did.
Awesome. Sounds like a lot. It sounds like a lot of time, effort, energy was spent in both by the YAB, but also by partners to make sure that young people were integrated in like every stage of the process, which is really awesome. One question that's, I think, for everyone on the panel, so whoever would like to jump in, do you have suggestions for other communities that want to create a YAB, or maybe they already have a YAB, but you know, we all know there's always room to strengthen what we're doing. Any thoughts or advice that you would give to other communities?
So I would say if you're going to start a YAB, um, one, start with some of the connections that you have with the young people that you already do serve, because I think that relationship is what uh, is most important. I feel like if you have a relationship with the young people where they trust you and you know you have a respect for one another, um, I believe that that's the core of at least our board, and I think that's what keep our board going. Because even when COVID came around and we went virtual, everyone who's a part of the board still shows to every last one of our meetings as if we were still in person. And I think it's because we have that we built upon that relationship, to know that we support you not only on the board but even outside the board. So I would say start with building relationships with the young people that you're going to be serving, and then just make sure you prioritize use voice, um, and sheer power, uh, because the only thing that will quench youth, a youth or any type of members' participation or willingness to be on this board is thinking that whatever they say, it doesn't really matter because you're going to override it, or uh, you're not going to respect their opinion. So they just, won't share anything. So that shared power is important because then they know that they can actually have an effect on the systems and the things that we are doing. So
I have something to add. We also have fun days, which is pretty cool. So like one of our fun days, we all watched a movie together through Zoom, and we had like a meal like delivered to us. So everybody ate a meal together and watched the movie. And it kind of like spending time with one another outside of like regular meeting times.
That's awesome. Work hard and also enjoy each other and have fun together. Anyone else want to add anything about YAB?
Yeah, I would say I think one of the things that I would recommend other communities do is make sure that you have resources to compensate participants for their time. So the city is a paid opportunity, and I think that's really critical. And then I think just to kind of echo what Leslie said, the community building and the fun is important, and it's not something to lose sight of. So I always enjoy going to city meetings because the first half hour is like a check-in, and it's like not like and really an agenda. It's structured, but it's more focused on hearing from everybody, like sharing fun facts, just kind of checking in how everyone's been since the last meeting. And I know I get a great sense of community from it, and I feel like probably that's fair to say for everybody who's a part of it. So it's real easy, to come in with an agenda and want to get like all this business done. And I sometimes like have to temper that in myself, because I think when you're like coming from, program development or systems, like you're often just like very focused on a goal and an objective and getting something done. But I think the way that Allegheny County's YAB is structured, like has this really nice marriage of like social and work. And I think it works really well.
Awesome. One question I have, this might be for Laura or Devin, I'm not sure who would want to respond, but one of the things I've seen in other communities is like the importance of having system leader buy-in around having a YAB and making sure that folks are all ready to like hear perspectives from folks who may not have always been invited to share their perspectives and be ready to actually act on those. What was your process like to make sure that system leaders were on board, ready to go, and like Leonardo said, in a position to share some power? Anyone can answer that. I'm not sure who would like to.
I'm just trying to think. So I think from the perspective of a staff member at Allegheny County Department of Human Services, I mean, one thing is that the Youth Advisory Board has been around for a decade or more. And so I really think it's had strong leadership buy-in from the beginning, and maybe Leonardo has more of the history of that. I think our leadership across DHS is very committed to city and has seen the type of honesty and impact that city has had. And so I think that because it's been such a well-functioning group and so committed, it's like each success sort of brings more and more opportunities to engage at the system level. So I don't know if Leonardo, if you have more thoughts on that, like sort of leadership's role with city.
Yeah, well, I agree that you gotta have buy-in from, all the different partners that you have when it comes to the board. If I was to say that our board just runs off of everything that we just do by ourselves, I'll be lying. We have a lot of people who promote in city, talking to other providers like, oh, you should go to city and talk to, so uh, I think building those connections with other partners and explaining to them how important the board is and trying to get them to buy into it will be um, a huge help to running the board. I think that when YHDP came around, that became a huge support and like an opportunity for the youth and the members on the board. So we was just like, you know what, let's dive into this. And I think from getting into one project, as Laura said, when you start working on one, you kind of get exposure from that one, and then you can reach out to others. So I think as far as like the leaders, we as providers or as partners got to do or have complete buy-in on the boards, so the board can know that they are wanted and their services is needed.
Awesome. One more YAB specific question, though we know YAB kind of weaves through everything, before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the programs and what that implementation has looked like. Leslie, one of the projects that you had mentioned that the YAB has worked on is these standards of practice. Can you talk about what those are and how you hope that they can be implemented?
Yeah, they are guidelines for programs that are selected by Allegheny County to, like, for instance, the Oberle's program. They include topics like wellness, inclusion, conflict mediation, and communication. There are like expectations. There is recommendations such as having a movie night, but there are basically expectations for programs.
That's awesome. So really setting a standard of accountability of saying all programs that are serving young people experiencing homelessness are going to operate with these at least minimum expectations. I think that's really, really great. And I would love to see more of that happening as well.
Thank you.
So let's get into shift gears and think about the program models that are being implemented through YHDP. So Laura mentioned the host homes, the rapid rehousing, prevention, diversion, youth navigation. Devin, can you talk about the program models that Auberly is implementing to serve youth and young adults experiencing homelessness through YHDP?
Absolutely. So Oberly has a history of having a youth focus as a whole, just as an organization. And our first housing program was actually for individuals who were 18 to 24. So while some of these things weren't new to us, what was really amazing to us is bringing on these two new programs and having youth involvement. So with our programs all along the way, everything that we have done, we've been able to take back to the city group in order to have them look at it and have the youth advisory board really look at what it is that we're putting out there to make sure that we're putting out the best information. So our first program is a traditional rapid rehousing program. What is new about this program to our agency is that it assists individuals and families, but also it has a strong roommate focus. So it's really nice. We put together a really phenomenal roommate questionnaire and then a comprehensive agreement that goes along with it, so that when individuals come in, if they are potentially interested in having a roommate, we have them complete this questionnaire. And then we have other individuals from our agency, from other programs, and then even in some cases, we're hoping to reach out to other agencies to be able to have individuals complete this questionnaire. And then based on answers, then we set up a meeting. And then it's kind of like matching. So people get to meet, they see if moving forward is something that interests them. And then based off of the answers, we can come to a agreement between all of the parties so that everybody kind of has some guidelines about what it is that they're comfortable with whenever they live together. The other program that we have, Laura had mentioned, is a diversion program. It's a very unique homeless prevention program that is, we just have been really excited about this program. My case manager is so good at selling this program. We attempt to work with individuals to realize who their natural supports are, and then really just kind of having these deeper conversations about maybe some individuals that they didn't think of that could become a natural support, and working with them on how to either establish those relationships or strengthen those relationships. We then work with them on other resources or referrals. If an individual is not a good fit for this program, we still work with them for resources and referrals. We work with these individuals, and it's for people who are facing some kind of housing insecurity for a number of different reasons. So it could be that where they're staying, they just aren't getting along with the person in the moment. So then we can work with them in order to stabilize that for either something short term, so then they can move on after they're comfortable and not going at risk of losing their housing in the moment. We can work to hopefully amend that relationship in some kind of a way so that they could stay there longer term. We also work with people to relocate very quickly if that's what's necessary, as quickly as they're able to. We work with individuals that are in shelters that could perhaps already have income and things, but a lot of the landlords don't want to give someone a chance because they don't have a rental history or they don't have a credit history. We already have established relationships with landlords that are willing to work with our individuals. And it's really just a great program to be able to connect people to resources that they either already have or resources that they didn't know about. And once we have their housing situated, then we do work with them to make sure that they can maintain their housing. So we are continuing to do a little check-in afterwards, continue to go over the budget, really talk about how budgets work and how a budget works for you instead of you working for your budget, so that your money works for you, and making sure that people have the best opportunity to keep their housing.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Laura, would you like to talk a little bit more? You touched on the host home program and the youth navigation program, but could you dive into those a little bit more about what they are, who they serve, and kind of how they work?
Sure. Yeah, so host homes are a model that some folks listening may be familiar with. It's kind of a movement that has taken off across the country, but we haven't had this in Allegheny County in the past. And so it's basically, reliant on community members who are interested in opening up their home, both a space for a young person who's unstably housed to live, but more than that, really providing a supportive environment. Offering some mentorship and help with some access to basic needs. So there's an agency that does this work. They're called Valley Youth House. Some folks may be familiar with them. They do a lot on the eastern side of the state. And they have been offering this program in some of the rural counties around Allegheny County. And then through YHDP, we had the opportunity to bring them into Allegheny. The program is meant to provide pretty flexible supports. It can usually, a few weeks to a few months. It's not typically meant to be a permanent housing solution, although there are times when in the past with the host home provider that we're working with, hosts and youth have decided that it worked as a long-term arrangement and ended up going that route. But rather it's meant to be, a safe, really affirming and welcoming space where a young adult can sort of stabilize and figure out their long-term housing options. So there is, extensive vetting and screening. Hosts need to go through background check, home inspection for safety, and then there's, a lot of training and onboarding to support them. The program is interesting because there's a couple of different ways that someone can be paired up with a host. And so somebody who comes in who has a natural support, maybe it's a relative, a teacher, somebody in their life who they feel comfortable living with and who would feel comfortable hosting them. They could actually become the host. It could also be a recruited volunteer that the participant is matched with. The key thing is that it's really a program model that's driven by youth choice. So it is not, even though it kind of shares some similarities with foster care, it's not a placement. It's 100% voluntary, and the agency works to, almost like how Devin described with their shared housing approach, there's like this intensive matchmaking process. And then participants can say, yes, I feel comfortable living with this person and I want to move forward. The agency provides supportive services. There's a housing stabilization coach who works on all kinds of goals around housing, education, employment, really driven by the participant and their needs. And then the household can also receive some financial assistance to help with any additional costs that they're incurring, transportation, additional food costs. So we're in the stage of really working to promote the model, recruit volunteers, but also starting to take applications from those who are interested in participating. So that's the host home program. The Youth Navigation Project is an effort to build our homeless system's capacity to provide one-on-one individualized support and build relationships with young adults who are unstably housed and navigating our homeless system. We found that when we were doing the community plan and really analyzing information about young adults in our homeless system, we found that there were some inconsistencies as far as who had those types of supports in place. Some young adults have a lot of support from systems and natural supports. Others are navigating a system that's pretty large and pretty, frankly, difficult sometimes to navigate, and doing it very much on their own. So we felt that it was really important to build some of that capacity. So we have a team that is prepared to work with young adults sort of across their journey to stable housing, whether they are, first connecting while they're staying in shelter, or it could be a referral from a street outreach provider. And really, even if that household or that young person is, has a couple of stops along the way before they find stable housing, they don't have to lose that consistent point of contact. They have somebody who's able to kind of walk alongside with them and work with them no matter where they are staying at any given moment. And then they're also working really intensively on housing problem solving, helping with move-in. If they end up moving into housing and they still need some supports to stabilize, or they're interested in working on other goals like education, then this team can provide that level of support as well.
So it sounds to me like you're really trying to create a full continuum. So no matter where someone is in their housing journey, or no matter what type of housing or support resource they need, that they can get plugged in, which I think is really important and often a challenge in many communities as well. You and Devin both touched on this, but I'd love to just highlight kind of anything your community is doing to serve youth who are kind of fall in that unstably housed, couch surfing, at risk of homelessness definition. I know many communities struggle with figuring out what resources make sense to serve young people who may not meet HUD's literal homelessness definition. So I'm wondering if you all could just reiterate like some of the activities that you're doing to really make sure that those young people don't fall through the cracks.
Yeah, I can start, and then if Devin or anyone else wants to jump in, please do. So the project models that we touched on, all except for the rapid rehousing, can serve youth who are in that category 2 unstably housed or couch surfing situation. That's what Auberly's Hope Project, the diversion project that Devin was talking about, is really especially targeted toward. But our host home program is also available to young adults who are either experiencing, literal homelessness or sort of that at risk of imminent homelessness. And that's new for our continuum of care. We, traditionally most services have required people to be either, experiencing unsheltered homelessness or in shelter, one of those sort of HUD literal categories. So it's really a big change for us to be able to work a little bit more upstream and try to do more on the preventative and diversion end of things. And really driven by the feedback that we got. One of the biggest pieces of feedback that was consistent, not just with young adults who had lived experience or who had friends who had experienced homelessness, but also really significantly from our school-based partners, from homeless liaisons, and other folks who are advocating sort of around McKinney-Vento, was the feeling that our system really could be doing a lot more to support those doubling up, since that's really so prevalent in younger adults. And like you said earlier, Jessica, a lot of younger people don't show up in shelter or unsheltered, but it's that sort of couch surfing and tenuous housing that is really really predominant.
Would anyone else like to add any thoughts or comments about any of these housing models, housing and service models, really, before we move on? Any wise words or thoughts? All right. So I really love to talk about partnerships. What I would love to hear from everyone, actually. We know that addressing youth homelessness is not a role that only lives in kind of housing and homeless services. If anything, it should not live just in housing and homeless services, because there's so many other partners that need to be at the table. Can you all talk about some of those partnerships that have really been critical in the implementation of YHDP?
I can talk about some partnerships that we have. So our agency has its own employment institute, but we've also been able to reach out to other agencies that have employment or training or even GED assistance. We've been able to reach out to CCAC and other schools to help individuals enroll in school or even get back to school. We had a young gentleman who, when he was living with his foster parents, he was in a private school. And then whenever he was kicked out of that house, they did not pay the tuition. So whenever he tried to get his diploma and start at another school, they couldn't do it because they couldn't get his transcripts from the private school because tuition wasn't paid. So we've been able to make partnerships that are really amazing in order to fix some just unique things. We also have relationships. We have a local, it's like a smaller bus than our Port Authority bus, to get individuals transportation. This bus is a quarter. It gets people back and forth to where it is that they need to go. We have a relationship with the health department that has been huge, especially in trying to make sure that people are in safe, adequate housing. So and also we have a relationship with one of the agencies that owns and manages a significant number of subsidized units. So I can email this individual and say, how many 1-bedrooms do you have? All of the locations email back and say how many 1-bedrooms they have, and then we can get someone's application in there right away. So just being able to just have those personal relationships with a variety of different agencies, we've really been able to do what we do well.
I guess I would add a couple of, those are all great examples. I would add our behavioral health system is a big partner. And oftentimes, if there's a housing resource available through behavioral health, that's another option that we can pursue for someone outside of the homeless system, since, our homeless system doesn't always have the capacity to meet everyone's needs immediately. And then another big partner that I would say is our McKinney-Vento regional coordinator, and then all of the homeless liaisons, especially in school districts that have traditionally have more young adults experiencing homelessness. And some of the partners who work in the community around educational access. There's a nonprofit called Homeless Children's Education Fund that tends to do a lot of good work in identifying teens and young adults who are unstably housed. And it's sort of a two-way street. So they bring referrals to our system. They help us make sure that people are being served and supported. But they're also a really good resource for helping work through any educational barriers that somebody might be facing while they're homelessness or after they become stably housed.
Alrighty. So I think we can move into the Q&A. We haven't had a lot of questions in the Q&A yet, but if you've been holding on to a question that you've been wanting to ask, now's the time. Type it in the Q&A box. Otherwise, we have other things we'd love to share with you as well if there's no burning questions. So the first question I will direct to Leonardo. How many members are in the YAB and how do you go about recruiting members?
All right, so we have enough slots for about 10 to 12 members. And we are currently still, we're currently recruiting. So, and the way that we go about recruiting members is the board created an application. They created a code of conduct from scratch. And we have a website where those things are linked on there. So all they gotta do is go to the website and fill out the application and then send it back to us. And then they can come and check out one of our meetings before they, fully commit. So they can come in, check it out, see some of the work that we do. And then they have a meet and greet with the other members on the board where we just talk to them, sort of like an interview, but we call it a meet and greet because it's not as serious as an interview. So we just pretty much get to know them a little bit, and they get to know the board members, and then after that, they're a part of the board, and all they have to do is really commit to the times that we would meet, and just pretty much say that they'll participate, and that's all. So once we get the application, that's the process, and yeah, it's been working pretty well.
So what do you all think is going to be the biggest challenge in supporting unstably housed youth in the pandemic going forward? Kind of a big question. Anyone feel free to respond.
I think one of our hardest challenges right now is housing stock. I don't really know what's going to happen with some of the moratoriums being lifted and then landlords proceeding. We're not sure if that's going to cause rents to increase, if that's going to cause us to end up with additional clients that maybe have never been in the system before, or if it's going to mean that landlords are still waiting because there are additional programs that are continuing to come up. So landlords might still be waiting and then housing won't be available. So it's just that uncertainty about what housing stock is going to look like and then what it's going to do to the overall housing cost in the market. Other than that, it's some employment concerns and more, not just even getting employment. I don't think that we've ever really had trouble with our individuals that we work with getting employment. It's a matter of right now, are they going to be able to keep the employment if things continue to be uncertain as to what industries may or may not close?
Anyone else want to add any thoughts on that?
I mean, I would echo what Devin said, and I think another concern. I know there have been some reports recently from Schoolhouse Connection and some of the national organizations that focus on educational rights and access, and it looks like, comparing this time last year with this time with now and the impact of the pandemic on schools' ability to identify young adults, students, families experiencing homelessness, it seems like there's been a dramatic shift there with, according to the reports I've seen, like hundreds of thousands of students across the country who are not being counted. And, I think we've seen this a bit, with some of the folks in our system who are in shelter but still enrolled in high school and over the course of the pandemic, like really not participating as much in school or leaving school altogether. And I think just knowing the impact that having a high school diploma or a GED has on your ability to secure employment and to be able to afford housing long term, I think that's something that I know I think about a lot.
Those are all really good points. I know I've definitely seen a lot coming out about how how schools are or are not able to identify students experiencing homelessness right now and how challenging it is. And there's so many young people that have kind of dropped off the radar during virtual schooling as well. And Devin, your point about housing stock, I know that concern is reiterated with folks across Pennsylvania, housing affordability, rentals just being available, period, and also finding folks who are willing to rent to youth. It can be a really challenging dynamic to navigate. So there's another question that we got, which is how do you outreach to the youth? Anyone have thoughts on that they want to add to that?
Yeah, well, one thought is we've been trying to make use of the networks that we know that have contact with young adults during the pandemics, and so one of those is the medical community. We had some meetings with folks from our one of our bigger health systems that does a lot with adolescent medicine, and really tried to educate them about the new resources that we have, get them the information to make referrals. We're also working closely with higher education partners, especially our community college, but also, other universities and schools in the area that in recent years have started to see more housing instability among their student bodies. Definitely our school partners, even though there are, reports of a lot of disconnects and difficulties in outreaching to students, we still know that there are some strong connections with guidance counselors and homeless liaisons in the districts. And then, putting out public service announcements, like trying to kind of spread the word in every avenue that we can. We also work really closely as a continuum of care. We have street outreach providers, and we have something called the mobile field unit that is sort of the coordinated entry system out in the community. And even though the pandemic has led to new challenges and new ways of doing service delivery, a lot has shifted to virtual. There's still a presence out there in person, engaging with people.
I'm going to build on that question and throw it out to Leonardo and Leslie, which is Laura talks kind of about outreach to young people in general, but I'm wondering how you've managed to retain your membership of the YAB during the pandemic, because I've heard from other communities that that's been a big challenge, is keeping folks engaged and also just connected to people. How have you all gone about that? Because it sounds like you've had a lot of success with that.
Right. So with our board, I really do think it's the relationships that we built with the youth, with our members. I believe most of our members have been on the board for longer than 3 years. And prior to COVID, they were coming consistently. I would say we always had like a core group, and then we had a few others who would like pop up every now and then, but then fall off. So our core group remained consistent over the course of the years, and even during COVID, they're still here. And I would say I really think that's because of the relationship, because I think that um, they prioritize coming to the board over a lot of other things. Sometimes we gotta be like, no, 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 you gotta go. That's important. You gotta go do that. And but we have a relationship to a point where they will even let us know, like, hey, something's coming up, so I won't be able to make it to the next board meeting. So I really think it's the foundation we set it on, which is like we care about you. I think that's the main thing. Like, we care about your voice, we care about how your day is going. That's why we start off every meeting with just checking in with everyone. And I think, like, if we're going to, even if it's not for a youth board, if you're trying to reach youth just to help them with services, even surrounding homelessness, you got to come from a point of view that we care, and that it's not just about my program or what we have. Is we care about how are you feeling right now, are you okay, and just meeting them on that level. So I think that's where it's at, is we just built the foundation where they feel supported, and we just want to be that support, and then the work comes after the support.
Want to add anything to that, Leslie?
Yeah, I happen to agree with that. They often will ask us, like if if we say we're having a bad day or something, they'll check in with us after the group, or they'll call us another time and ask how we're doing and help us with it, like if they can, or just listen to us. So I feel like it creates a caring environment and everything. Um, and plus, some of our members, they have jobs and everything else outside of that. So like sometimes like it might be like, keep in mind that some of the members may have jobs or having outside responsibilities on top of the youth action board.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for that. This question is about the success rate. So what's the success rate you're seeing for moving youth out of a homeless or housing unstable situation to stability, or do you see a revolving door?
I guess I'll answer this from a system perspective. So when we've done analysis, we have sort of a big dashboard for our homeless system that is specifically focused on transition aged youth 18 through 24. And we actually don't see a lot of returns to homelessness, and we use we use like the 2-year threshold. So if somebody exits a homeless housing program, we look at a 2-year window to see who's ending back up in the homeless system. We see very small numbers of that. I think particularly because rapid rehousing is, an evidence-based model that has been shown to be really effective. That seems to be working well. I will say our new programs are brand new, and we're only just beginning to enroll participants. Like we've had the funding for a couple of months, but a lot of the time has been, building up staff and kind of getting outreach happening. So we won't know for a little while. It's going to take some time to be able to track that. But we're optimistic that, since we're scaling up things that we know work, and then we're also, experimenting with new projects, but there are also projects that have had some success in other communities. We're hopeful that it will not be a revolving door, but a really stable housing situation.
So this question is about how to identify youth, and Laura, you touched upon the challenge of schools often operating virtually now and just having less of those face-to-face contacts. So how do you find youth experiencing homelessness when the schools are not open? This person noted that their referrals from schools have pretty much stopped, and COVID has created this barrier, and it's challenging to know that there are kids who and young adults who need help but can't be identified. Does anyone have any thoughts or strategies around that? I know you touched on a few.
I want to leave space for other folks to add their thoughts, but yeah, I mean, we have gotten and usually get a lot of referrals from behavioral health. There's referrals from institutions like hospitals. Another big source is some of the grassroots community-based organizations, especially in our county. We are lucky that we have a number of agencies that specifically focus on youth who identify as LGBTQ. So there's some drop-in centers. There are programs that are doing like hotel stays or privately funded shelters, and they tend to do a lot of identification and will make a lot of referrals to our homeless system. So it's, I don't know, I feel like we get referrals from all over the place, like basically any agency. Sometimes it's libraries, although a lot of them are closed right now. But I don't know, Devin or Leonardo or Leslie, if you have other ideas that come to mind.
Yeah, so I was literally thinking about this, and I think what came to my mind is that uh, I guess promotion of our resource has to be out, like we have to promote it for people to know more about it, uh, to even do those referrals, if that makes sense. So I was thinking like the best, because of the COVID barriers and things that have put up that have been placed, uh, if we could figure out where where is the places that, youth who are, homeless or in those type of systems, where are some of the places where they go to for resources? And then, just refresh those places or those areas about the resource that we provide. Because believe it or not, sometimes, you might have had a connect with someone at that organization, but they moved on to a different, you know, way. And now you got to go back and refresh them on the resources so they can, keep those referrals coming in. So I really thought long and hard about that, but I was thinking usually if you want the referrals to come in, they got to know about, what you're providing, and it got to be the right places where the youth go to. So yeah.
We've been doing a lot of outreach and being able to do some meetings at staff meetings for other agencies. So that's been extremely helpful.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this session. We hope that it's been informative for you all, and I myself have enjoyed learning from all these folks on the panel. So thank you all again, and enjoy your next session.